Okay, we're talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 2. I've just seen it, it's fresh in my mind. What did I think? I thought that it felt like an episode of TOS. I feel like I'm going to be saying that a lot, but it did. And feeling like TOS is something important. And I think that's something that they've finally gotten through their heads. So, basically, there's this pre-warp civilization that is on this world, and there's a meteor in the sky, and they have no idea what it is, but apparently it's going to hit their planet. The Enterprise is observing both the planet and the comet. Is it a comet or a meteor? I believe it's a comet at this point, yes. So they're observing the comet. And then we cut to Uhura, and she is in dress uniform, and she is being hazed by Ortega, because I guess Ortega, that's just how it goes on the ship, and they're going to dinner at Pike's, which is fun. And it's also fun watching them kind of play on the new cadet. You see here, she's got the cadet badge, which I believe is the same badge worn by Tilly in Discovery. You know what? As long as there's not too much reference to Discovery in this, we will be okay. At this point, we need to just accept that this is a corrupted timeline, because Wesley made a joke about a whole century being corrupted. And until somebody tells me otherwise, I'm going to assume that Wesley had an effect on the 23rd century, and this is now a corrupted timeline by him. So, as far as that's concerned, this is TOS 2.0. We've officially got TOS 2.0. So some Discovery assets in this are going to be okay, so long as they're not part of Discovery, because Discovery's just a shit show, and there's no defending that show whatsoever. So anyway, they go to Pike's, and he laughs at the fact that she's in her dress uniform, and so does number one. You know what? This is a fun scene. Everybody's getting along. It's showing a camaraderie and interaction between everybody. So it feels like Pike has a family here. And you know what? This is a far cry from the Pike that said, I can't get used to the fact of having a woman on the bridge. I mean, most of Pike's senior staff in this are women. So I'm glad that that's, in that aspect, I'm glad that this is TOS 2.0. It's just a chance to do things differently. And then we have our Anar character. His name is Hemmer, and she sees that he's blind, and I suppose her first instinct is to help him, but it turns out that he doesn't require her help because, well, he's an Anar, and all of his other senses make up for his eyes not being there. And even Spock overhears this, and she's like, well, I was brought up to help anyone with a disability. And he's like, well, I'm not disabled. And Spock comes up, throws him a carrot, he catches it, and it turns out in their own way, they're messing with her. Even Spock is having fun. And this is what she says. She speaks in Dorian to him, and he's somewhat impressed. And, what's interesting about this is that Uhura, she was a background character in TOS. Yes, she was there. She was on the bridge. She always had a part to play. She always had something to say. But we never really got to know her. I mean, when Nomad makes her lose her memory, there's no talk of her family or sending her home. They just re-educate her and they keep her on the ship. I mean, at that point, she's a new person, right? But it's interesting that in this, they're actually fleshing her out a little more than she ever was before. And I can appreciate that. So we all sit down, and Pike's telling a joke, basically. I guess he chased a Nausicaan once who had no pants on. And then he tripped and fell. And when he looked down, he found that he tripped over the Nausicaan's pants. And it's a funny story. And Spock makes a very Spock-like comment, saying he doesn't know why it's funny to laugh at people's failures or mishaps. And Pike basically tells him, well, sometimes when things are so bad, you just have to be able to laugh at yourself. And you just have to be able to laugh. And so Spock takes that. And she laughs, and it's just like a whole thing, and he's pouring people drinks, and he asks her, so I hear you speak 13 different languages. I think he said 13, I don't remember, but 13 languages. And she's like, actually, I speak 36. And everybody's just kind of looking at her. And she basically explains that where she comes from in Africa, that there are villages with a bunch of different languages, like 22 of them. And the easiest way to communicate there was to just learn all the languages. So she has an ear for language. So again, we're finding out more about her, and this is interesting. And Pike makes a little joke, and we see the camaraderie between him and number one. They're friends. And see, that's something I always liked. I always liked number one. I always liked her and Pike together. And they're played really well. And so they basically ask her about how she's like first in her class and she beat out thousands to be here. She makes the comment that she never really wanted to be in Starfleet, and they ask her to elaborate. And here's the first problem that I have with this episode. I mean, you know, if I'm reviewing this, I guess I'm going to nitpick it a little. And this is something from Discovery. So, in Discovery, I guess... Okay, I've seen the first 3 seasons of Discovery. From what I've gathered of Season 4, I haven't seen it. I've only seen reviews and stuff. But what I've gathered... There's always some tragic backstory to someone. Every time a character is introduced, they have some tragic backstory. It's almost become a meme at this point. That anytime anyone gets any kind of backstory, it's some tragic backstory. Well, turns out that Uhura's parents died in a shuttle accident. She was raised by her grandmother. Her grandmother was in Starfleet. And so, when her grandmother passed away and she had no one left, she ran away to Starfleet. So she wasn't intending to be in Starfleet, but she ended up in Starfleet. And that's her backstory. And they tell her that she basically is in the right place right now, and that it's a family, and she's come to the right place, and they're going to help her. You know, it's a team building exercise, basically. It's a good little scene between them, and it adds some stuff onto Uhura, but I don't know that Uhura needed a tragic backstory, but I guess there it is. And Spock basically tells her that if she's really not... Okay, also, I do not know what is going on with these Spock sideburns, but they're not doing it for me. These sideburns are weird. He's wearing a wig. His hair just looks weird. Okay, I said it. But he basically tells her that if you don't want to be in Starfleet, you should maybe make room for people who do. Because, you know... And so now we've got... This episode is basically... The cadet is unsure of herself. And it's going to be an Uhura episode. And with this being episodic TV and everything not being one giant story that's stretched across a season like Picard has been, or like Discovery is, you know, we can have individual episodes about characters. And that's kind of nice. And so, number one and Pike are talking. And what brought up the whole conversation with Uhura was that he asked where she saw herself in 10 years. And he kind of stuttered thinking about 10 years because he knows where he's going to be in 10 years. So, number one's like, I heard when you stuttered there. And you know, Pike, you might be able to change things. You might be able to have a different outcome. He's like, well, I know the names of the kids that I save on that ship. She's like, you know their names. He's like, I know their names. And he's like, I can't escape this. So they're talking about his basically knowing his future. And that's a whole dilemma on his mind. And number one's trying to help him through it. Again, this is almost like Bones or Spock talking to Kirk. So it's a good scene. Then there's a red alert and Captain to the bridge. And I guess this thing is going to hit the planet and it's going to fuck it up. And they show this and then it rewinds and it's a sim on the bridge, which is cool. And you know what? I have to say it. Just the color palette, the oranges and just the bright like reds and greens and everything in here just looks so much like TOS or harkens back to just the original series. And it gives it such an aesthetic on here that looks so good. And essentially, they decided they need to move the asteroid, and that the way to do that is to fire some photons with some ion engines, attach them, and nudge it out of the way. And Pike says, I like this idea, let's do it. And she gives him a time frame. He's like, oh, I'm the engineer, I've got to do it. Yeah, Hemmer, he's going to be our chief engineer, so that's interesting. He's like, well, I've got to do it in that time frame. So he's like, let's get it done, people. And they fire the photons, and you know what? These photons look great. This thing looks great, firing its red photons from right exactly where it should be on the ship. That looks beautiful. I love these shots. And they hit the asteroid, and it's got a shield on it. That's interesting. And Pike's like, how the hell does an asteroid get a shield? And then it turns out that, okay, again, these sets. I love these sets. So there's a structure on the planet. And there's a shield, but they think they can beam down there. They bring in Sam Kirk because he's xenobiology. So since they found a building on there, it's his job to go down there and explore it. And they're putting a team together. And it's going to be Uhura because she's a linguist and they want this to be her first mission. They're going to get her feet wet. It's going to be Lennon, it's going to be Spock, it's going to be Sam. And so there's a shit ton of radiation out there, and Chapel has to give them inoculations for that. And she flirts with Spock, and he doesn't notice, and it's cute. And so giving them these inoculations hurt like fuck. And she didn't warn them. And Uhura says something. She's like, well, it's the fun if I warn you. And then she gives it to Lennon, and it doesn't even faze her. So I've got some Augment vibes here going on because she doesn't feel that. And she flirts with Spock and he doesn't notice it, but it's cute. And again, I like Chapel. Chapel's fun. And she gives it to him. And you know what? These suits that they're in, these EV suits, they're new, but they're minimalistic. They're in like a kind of suit that feels like a fabric. Okay, I'm going to throw it up on screen here, but the TOS... In TOS, they had EV suits, and they were fabric, and then they had some pieces on them. This feels like the TOS thing. It even has some of the same shapes and stuff. But it's more streamlined, and it looks more realistic, and this is good. I like these suits. They are more contemporary, and they look more realistic, and, you know, they're up to snuff with today's... Yeah, he's even got a phaser. The phaser looks great. That looks great. Okay, so they're up to snuff with today's production values, but they harken back to those old uniforms, and they just look great. And their lights come on in the helmet, and that looks great. And one thing that's great about this transporter room that I'm going to get used to is with the transparent backside to it, the camera can go around and do some cool moves as they beam. And so they're on the asteroid, and they make their way inside, and there's an egg of some kind. And they start scanning, and it's just them there. They have no idea what they're doing. And so Sam tells her that she's going to be up, and he asks her a question, what she thinks of it. And she's like, you're asking me? He's like, well, you're here, aren't you? You are the linguist, so it makes sense I'm going to ask you questions. Yeah, but I'm the cadet. Well, sooner or later, you're going to have to get used to this. And he tells her, don't worry, you got this. I know you're nervous, but you got this. So he walks up. And as he does, the thing lights up, and it starts lighting up more, and he's excited, and Spock tells him to stand back, and he says, no, it's simple, it's a game, it's just a game, like Yahtzee, don't you know? And Spock's like, I'm aware of what Yahtzee is, but I think you should stand back, there's some kind of energy buildup. And he doesn't listen, and he gets close, and he gets zapped and blown away. And you know what, if nothing else, this looks like something out of the Next Gen or out of TOS, and it looks Star Trek-y, and it's beautiful. This is just gorgeous. This is simple. This is just light, but it looks cool. And, okay, earlier they said that there was oxygen here so they could take off their helmets. They take his helmet off, and he's in bad shape. But you know what? This is something that... I mean, Sam Kirk, you know nothing's going to happen to him because he dies in TOS. He dies in the original series in Operation Annihilate. So, you know he's not going to die here. So, this is just false drama with a character that you know can't get killed. unless they're going to change things. But yeah, so this kind of doesn't work. He's not going to be, he's going to be okay. And they call for beam out, and they can't be beamed out. And one thing that's cool is the tricorder, I guess the medical tricorder, has a defibrillator mode on it. Look at that little screen right there. That looks like a screen right out of McCoy's sickbay. But it looks so good. And they put the little tricorder scanner to his suit, and it defibrillates him. That's just a brilliant way to use a medical tricorder. That's using the original prop in a newer way that looks contemporary, shows more functionality. It actually looks advanced, but it still looks like the same original prop. I love that. I absolutely love that. So now they're worried, and they call for beam out, but they can't get beamed out because the shields are back up. And while they're trying to figure this out, they realize they're going to be stuck here, and they have to figure out what to do. And so they tell Uhura that she has to maybe look at this thing and see if she can figure it out. Okay, one thing I forgot is that earlier she noticed that some of these patterns were repeating. So she's already kind of onto it, but she hasn't gotten there yet. And so it's up to her to figure this out. Meanwhile, on the surface, these aliens, they see the comet heading towards them. They see it up in the sky, and they're afraid. And so I guess they come up with the bright idea that they need to get those shields down. So they're thinking, let's shoot it. Okay, here's the next nitpick. This scanner here that is on Ortega's station, this is supposed to be for targeting the phasers and the photons. This is supposed to be a weapon station targeting scope. This thing I think is just permanently raised on this version of the bridge. It doesn't come out of the thing. It doesn't raise up out of the console. And I don't think it's for the weapons because there's an actual dedicated weapon station now. So that's just a little nitpick. But anyway, they're deciding that they're going to fire phasers at it, and that should knock out the shields. And I guess they think that's a good idea. Okay, these consoles, they're touchscreen. And that's today. We've got touchscreen, so it makes sense they'd have touchscreen. But there would be more tactile push buttons, because that's what okay. But I still like it. I like what these graphics look like. It makes sense, so this is good. But I mean, it makes the touchscreens in TNG seem less advanced if they have them here. But at least there are a lot of tactile push buttons. Back here, they're going over this thing, and she's just barely begun. And she's identifying that there are some repeating patterns. She's just basically starting to figure it out. Here, basically, the Non says, you know what? Either you're going to figure this out or we're going to die. I'm waiting to find out which it's going to be. And it's kind of a no-pressure type of moment. And back here, they're getting ready to attack, and then they get attacked. And he asks by what? Shields at 70%. He asks what's attacking us, and she's like, that. And there's some giant ship out there that they somehow did not detect coming up on them. They didn't see just appear. It just kind of shows up and attacks them and is just there. That's kind of weird. Okay, Uhura is a cadet, so she's not the only comm officer. This is Lieutenant Christina. I thought she was pretty cute, and I thought she played the scene pretty well. A beautiful woman. I liked her performance in this. So Lieutenant Christina, I like her. And there's this guy, I guess he calls himself a shepherd. He hails them, and he basically says that they are escorting the comet, which they call Muad'Dib, or Muad'Dib. Let's call it Muad'Dib. So they're escorting Muad'Dib. He basically tells them that this thing is preordained and it's going wherever it wants, and if anyone tries to get in its way, that they will stop them. And he says, yeah, the thing's going to hit the planet though, so that's kind of a problem. And we're going to need for it not to hit the planet. And he's like, if Muad'Dib wants to hit the planet, it's going to hit the planet. She's scanning the ship meanwhile, and they're not getting very far. This guy reminded me of maybe one of the religious zealots from Season 3 of Enterprise, or any number of insert Star Trek character here. He was kind of cool though. His head is like moving, so he's like all CG. Or maybe he's some prosthetics with some CG added on, but the head kind of pulsates and moves. It's kind of cool. But yeah, he essentially says Muad'Dib is going wherever Muad'Dib wants to go. And he says the word the shepherds. And Pike asks shepherds, and Lieutenant Christina is like, that's how the Universal Translator is processing it. I like that. I like that the UT is part of this and that they actually acknowledge it. They had it in TOS, it's just, it wasn't integrated quite as it is here in like a real-time translation. And so they don't get very far here. And he asks to give him a second. They turn it off. He's like, I need options here. Meanwhile, they're in the cave, and, you know, Sam Kirk's getting kind of worse, but obviously we know nothing's going to happen to him. He'll be fine. And Lenon's still wondering, am I going to die, or are you going to save the day, cadet? And this obviously makes Uhura nervous. Earlier, while having dinner with Pike, she said she hummed when she was nervous. So right here, she begins to hum again, and Spock notices her humming. So he walks up to give her a little Vulcan pep talk, which is very Vulcan-y, but it's the best he can really do. Okay, this was one part here. Pike told them, I don't care if you have to break the laws of physics, get me a comm signal in there. And we see next, Una, number 1, at the comm station. And I like that she isn't just number 1 for no reason. She knows this ship just as well as Pike, inside and out. She knows the communications, and in a crunch, she's the person you want there. And this comm officer stands aside. I like that they're just showing that. And she can't get through to there, and they're brainstorming, they're trying to come up with a plan. Meanwhile, she's still humming, and she realizes there's a resonance to this. And then she realizes that all the markings are mathematical representations of math and of music. The math is music. And they put it all together, and she starts humming. And she says, I need you guys to sing with me. And Lenon's like, nah, me. I skipped music class. So Spock has to do some humming with Uhura. And you know what? It feels like a solution that you would get out of Star Trek back in the day, and it feels exactly like what I would expect from Trek. But this look on Lenon's face here, that I can already see the fandom menace and all of the detractors out there making fun of this. That Spock sings with Uhura to a magical egg. But no, I think this is in keeping with her character. This is in character, seeing how we do see her sing in TOS, and Spock plays his Vulcan lyre to her singing. And in the 60s, they had to dance once to get out of something with, like, to fake out some androids or to fake out some gods. They had to play act more than once to get out of a situation in the original Star Trek. So they have to hum a few bars here. Big whoop. I can still see people making fun of this. And at the same time, back on the Enterprise, they begin to detect transmission, and it's the same song Uhura was humming back when they were having dinner with Pike. They asked the computer to identify the song, and it says it's a song from old Africa, and they know what it is. So this thing is broadcasting her song. And basically she figures out how to hum based on what's here. And the egg opens up, I suppose, for whatever reason. And they scan it, and she keeps humming. And I guess she figures out how to use music to tell this thing what to do, and it drops its shields. And Pike's like, get him out of there. Cut to Kyle, beams him up. Chapel comes running in. You know what? Dr. Mbenga isn't in this. I guess he should be, but Chapel's fine, because I like Chapel. So she comes running in, and they take Sam Kirk. And this was another problem. As soon as Sam Kirk got injured, and it was up to Uhura to get them out of there, Spock and Lenon had very little to do. If a character's on screen and you're working with, everybody should have something to do. So that became kind of an issue. And also, you know that Sam's not going to die, because he dies in TOS. So this is whatever. But he's now trying to get them out of there, and they're brainstorming. And this guy is basically telling them that he's going to destroy them for everything that they've done to this thing so far. And he starts firing at them. And we get a bunch of evasive maneuvers and the ship maneuvering. We get a lot of starship porn, which is something that I like. And he says to open fire on them. And here is where my nitpick from earlier came, is that He says to open fire on them, but they don't use the targeting sensor at the helm. They have a side station now that's dedicated to tactical. And that's not exactly how I want this to be. I want them to use the little scanner, but it's whatever. We get a lot of starship porn here, of the ship just maneuvering and avoiding shots. And this looks great. I like this. And they brainstorm, and you know what? The brainstorming feels a little ad hoc and a little just slapdash and very quickly written. But you know what? That's par for the course of current day Star Trek. I'm not quite sure if they'd come up with something that quickly in TOS. It would be written and structured a little different. But it's fine. And they end up shooting back and hitting them. And I guess they do some damage. Spock has an idea. And you know what? I didn't fully get what they were explaining here. But I guess they came up with a plan. I'll have to watch it a second time. I found watching the first one a second time and a third and a fourth time that it makes more... They say it all. It's all there in the dialogue. It makes more sense on repeat viewings. But anyway, their plan is to get behind this thing and to make them chase them. And he tells Ortega, you remember when you told me you were intent on being the best pilot in the fleet? Well, now is your chance to prove it. And so she names an invasive maneuver after herself, and Pike's like, wait, what? And they're taking a lot of shots, and it shows the shots hitting the shields. So they don't have a shield bubble. They've got a skin-tight shield grid. That's fine. Again, things are going to be different in this. But these are some really great shots of the ship. Some really great starship porn. And she flies around them as they're just pelting them. And she gets into the tail of the comet. I love these shots of the shields just getting hit. This all looks so good. I really do like this a lot. But she gets into the tail of the comet and they chase them in. And then they shut down all their main systems and they cut power. And they make it look like they've taken a lot of damage. And then they surrender and say, we're not going to touch this thing again. Please give us a tractor beam and tow us out of here. And you know what? That's fine. I thought they were going to actually stand down and do what Pike said. That get us out of here, tow us out, and we won't touch your comet again. We won't touch Muad'Dib. They were getting mad when he called it a comet. They didn't like that. So he says we won't touch Muad'Dib again. And they look at each other and they're, ugh. It turns out Spock's in a shuttle. And their plan is to go molest Muad'Dib some more. Technically, they're not going to touch it. They don't touch it. But he flies circles around it to the point where he heats up the ship because of the way he's flying around this thing, thermodynamics and all. Turns on the heat shield, and he uses the heat shield of the shuttle to do a little damage to the outside of Muad'Dib, and I guess do some thermodynamic friction sciencey stuff to just change the apex of the trajectory a little. And it's a whole thing to redirect it. And I guess the Shepard somehow didn't see Spock doing donuts around this thing in a shuttle. Look, it looks cool, but don't think about it too hard. Otherwise, it kind of hurts your head. One funny bit, Spock laughs, kind of like he does in The Cage in TOS. And everyone's like, Mr. Spock? And he harkens back to what they told him in the beginning of the episode, says, sometimes things are just so bad, you just have to laugh. And I have to admit, that was kind of a cute little scene for Spock. I did enjoy that. And then the Shepards are like, he looks at this. Okay, this is one thing. By flying around it like he did, he caused a bunch of water to come off of it and to seed water into the atmosphere of this planet. So now the planet is going to become more fertile, more habitable. It will have more like agriculture. It's going to help development of the local populace. It's going to change the climate here. So the comet added water to the planet, and that wasn't the plan, but that's what they ended up doing. And if you want, you can read all this. I'm sure it says stuff, and I'll read it the next time through. But that's essentially what they did. And then the guy contacts him, and he's like, you see, Muad'Dib, it was all prophesied. You didn't need to interfere. It wasn't going to hurt your little planet. And I guess they couldn't see Spock doing donuts around it in the shuttle. You know what? It was a cool looking scene and it was fun, but don't think too hard about it. Otherwise, it could hurt your brain a little. And on the planet, it starts to rain, which is kind of cool because I guess it doesn't rain where they are because they're kind of in an arid desert area. And so these guys are probably going to have like creation myths, 1,000 or 2,000 years from now. These guys will probably be in Discovery. 1,000 years from now, they'll have creation myths about how the comet brought rain to the world. And see, there's the targeting sensor again that they're not using. It's just kind of hanging out there. I don't like that. They need to use that. And so they go into the briefing room, and she basically tells them that the comet the entire time, the music that it was like showing them and all of the symbols in there was actually telling them something. And it was showing them how this thing was going to splinter, how it was going to seed water to the planet, and how it was just going to pass by, and how all this was preordained. And they're like, yeah, but if Spock hadn't flown the shuttle around it just like he did, this wouldn't have ended up like this. Are you telling me that this thing had some kind of pre-knowledge of what was going to happen? Some kind of precognizance? She's like, well, we received all this data before we flew the shuttle around it, so somehow it knew this was going to happen. And they're like, so sometimes things are meant to happen, and maybe things are meant to happen a certain way. And it's all a subtle, not so subtle message about don't be so sure about accepting your fate, because anything's possible. And Spock gives her a good little pep talk. Those sideburns are so distracting. But he tells her how well she did, and he leaves us with a more confident Uhura. Mission accomplished. And in the end, Pike's looking at the comet, Muad'Dib, and he's having a talk with number one. And she's like, look, if this can be a thing that's supposed to happen, maybe you can still save those kids, and you don't have to sacrifice yourself. Maybe things can still happen for a reason, and things can be changed. And she's just trying to tell him that he still has a future and not to give up. She's worried about him and she cares about him. And later on, that night, Pike is looking at his fire, and he goes and sits down at his computer, and he calls up the names of all of the kids that one day he's going to save. He wants to see their file. And it ends there. So it's got some, ongoing arcs to it, but they're individual episodic episodes, and they're pretty good. And again, the entire way this unfolds, everything that happens in this, everything about this feels like an episode of the original series. And that's exactly what I want. And I have my only complaints are nitpicks. And yeah, maybe some of the writing falls apart near the end of this. This episode was good. I liked it. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. 6 out of 10. This was a good episode, and I liked it. I mean, it wasn't as strong as the first episode, but it was still good, and we're still going strong. So, yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. If you watched this whole video, thank you. I very much appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes, and I hope everyone else is too. Hope everyone's doing well out there. Have a good day. Have a good night. Thumbs up, thumbs down. It's interaction. I appreciate it. And be well, everyone.